Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the next edition of the DFS Down Under show presented by Draftstars. We all know that Draftstars are Australia's #1 daily fantasy platform, offering Australian and New Zealand residents the chance to win big on AFL daily fantasy. My name is Smatho. Hef's here with me for another bumper edition of DFS Premium Previews. Mate, good evening to you. Thank you for the guys who are live on the stream this evening, and thank you to all those who are there on the replay. Make sure you give us a little thumbs up as you're watching this video. Or if you're on the podcast, give us a shout out on the podcast as well. Where are you listening from? And give us a bit of a pump up. So, Hef, how are you today, mate?
I'm good, thanks, Smatho. I'm getting some wear out of this big hoodie too. It's been bitterly cold down here in Hobart lately.
It is. It's only just the 3rd of June too, so we've got a bit of a long winter in front of you. You're already complaining about the winter here, but this swag from Draftstars does go up the alley, and hopefully for people who are in the golden ticket, you'll be receiving some swag very soon. So if you do have your swag, get on the Draftstars socials, maybe their Twitter or even their Facebook, and show us your swag if you've got a golden ticket. Now, I'll come to you very shortly, Hef, about this particular Friday matchup. But speaking of golden tickets, I do have to give out a bit of a shout out to our recent golden ticket winners from last week. And look at them all. As you can see here, there's a bit of a theme here. I've done it up in two sides. The first side is you've got the Kings there, right? You've got King 82. You've got Cut King. You've got Kingsley. And then you've got the Italianos who managed to score 2 tickets last week. And then if you just look on the right, there are some familiar names there, Hef. You must said, if you've been in the traps of daily fantasy for a long time, you do see these particular entrants on the leaderboard day after day, week after week. So we got T Better. I think that's his second ticket now. Fishcake, the king, as we call him, R. Whelan 09. Stimpy, the #1 ranked day fantasy ranks player. 870 for a while there. I think he's no longer #1, but we'll call him the former #1. And then the reigning belt-winning champion from 2019, Asanke, he nabbed his ticket today in the NBA. Full game. So he has punched his ticket to the big dance here in August. There's some familiar names there, mate, in there.
Absolutely. I did watch that NBA contest today with we've had one eye on that contest during the day, and he's really stormed home there, Asanke. Good to have the reigning champ back in for another crack at things.
Now, we are here thanks to Draftstars, but you can also find us on Daily Fantasy Rankings, which is one of the most premium resources for your AFL Daily Fantasy needs, previews, data tools, cheat sheets, points against. It's all there. Get to dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. Grab all the gear that you need from there. Now, let's talk about Friday night. Now, we are talking about Melbourne Demons versus the Brisbane Lions at Giants Stadium. So we're no longer in the top end. I do believe it was the top end. I think it was. So, mate, let's talk about this particular match. 7:50 p.m. start. Demons are favourites at $1.77. The Lions 3.5. Totals 161.5. There's been a fair bit of rain in Sydney lately. Been watching a bit of NRL just beforehand. There's a bit wet around there. It should clear by Friday, but could be a bit of a slick, wet surface out at Giants Stadium. And in team news, there's not much really to talk about from the Demons where Tommy Sparrow, who was the med sub, he's actually going to get a full game next week due to Ed Legdon's concussion. Whereas for Brisbane, a bit of surprise. Lockie Neal's back. Ryan Lester is also back. The barometer, Reef Matheson, he's been omitted after getting a lot of airtime this week in the press. Madden's out, and Tom Berry was the med sub as well, so he's no longer required. So any thoughts on those particular team news that dropped down on Thursday night?
The barometer, he was like the self-anointed barometer, and they've dropped him like a cold potato when Lockie Neal comes back into the team. Now, just quickly on Melbourne, interesting that Sparrow comes in, who not known yet as a fantasy scorer, but he does see a lot of time in the middle of the ground, and he's replacing Langdon, who obviously runs up and down a wing. So be interesting to see what the Demons do there in terms of replacing Langdon on that wing. Sparrow doesn't strike me as the type of player to run the wing, so they might cause a little bit of a change around in the structure there for the Ds. And then obviously they talked about Matheson being the Neil replacement, and that's what he is because he's been replaced by Neil coming back in. So Leicester comes in for Madden in the back line. So structure-wise, Brisbane doesn't look a whole lot different.
Fair enough. Makes sense if you're life for Neil and Matheson. So good observation there. Now, as always, we talk about the tools on the day fantasy ranking site, and I usually pluck out a couple of notes here for you, Hef. It gives us a bit of a baseline of what we would what we want to look at when we're doing the slate on this show. So here we go. Last 5 games. Now, this is the L5, the tool that you can find on the points against. The Demons give up the second most fantasy points to premium midfielders that average 118. In the last 5 games, Demons also give up the second most fantasy points to premier backs. All right, so that's 95 average the last 5 games. Demons are number 1 in the league for contested possessions, and what do you know? The Lions are number 2. And then also we touched on this last week, the Demons are fantasy wasteland for opposition ruckmen, which was shown last week when Geordie Sweet only scored 30-odd points. So as always, if you get to the Draftstars lobby, you can see all the contests for this particular matchup highlighted by the $75,000 contest. You've also got the $10,000 high roller, the 5,000 mini, the 5,000 fiver, the micro, the single entry, and of course the golden ticket qualifiers. Make sure you get to the Draftstars lobby to make sure to see all the contests are available for this particular match. So without further ado, Hef, let's bring up the lobby. There it is, $75,000. What you might notice as well, the little banner there is from Playbook, talking about all the interviews that I've been catching up with the golden ticket winners. So if you do have a spare 10 minutes of your time, make sure you get the Playbook and check out those interviews as well. There we go. Here from our golden ticket winners.
Right on cue.
Some great people have caught up already, and I'm looking forward to catching up with some more as throughout these tickets have been won. So let me click on the old enter on the 75K.
I'll jump in. That's always one of the best things I think about the live final is we get to learn a lot about these players. We only see them as a username. Some of the stories we've seen, this is the third one obviously we've been through now, and you definitely get to learn a lot about everyone. It makes the whole experience a lot more exciting and interesting. So good work from you there, Smatho, with a few of those interviews you're doing.
Look, I always say I'm excited to catch up with people. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm really excited. Like, it's awesome to catch up with people, share their background, share their stories. It's really, really good to get to catch up with people. So, yeah, give us if Draftstars reach out to say, look, would you like to get a shout out? Then, yeah, jump aboard. It's really good fun.
There's 2 times it's easy to talk to someone. 1 after they've won a golden ticket, and 2 after their horse has just won. They'll tell you anything you want to know. So, yeah. If Smatho taps you on the shoulder, give us something. Give us something.
Give us that one. All right. Let's talk about the rucks. So we talked about a theme last week that the Demons don't give up fantasy points. But Tim English last week did score a 90-odd fantasy point performance, but that's his new role. He's that little hybrid key forward, give a chop out the ruck like Joe Danaher pretty much does there at 10,640. Yeah. So
made famous by Lee Brown, that role.
Yeah, it does. Now, the thing I want to highlight here is the big own, Oscar McInerney. He torched the big mummy last week over the Giants and scored 106 fantasy points, which is his season's best so far. So that puts a little cat amongst the Mitchens where Gordon at 15,710, Oscar McInerney at 10,002. That's the 2 I want to talk about first up. Not really particularly keen on Jackson or Danaher because if you check out the tools on DFR, they say that forwards is no good in this matchup. So tell me, mate, Gorn start with 15,710. How do you rate his chances?
Seems a reasonable price to me for Gorn. We have spoken about Brisbane they were also a fantasy wasteland for rucks before this year, and then not so much. They're sort of middle of the pack. But if you look at Gorn's scores there, any sort of slippery conditions would probably suit him. One thing I've noticed about both of these teams is you showed the very strong in contested possessions, but then if you're trying to target them, you also want to look for the guys who are getting contested ball as well, which just indicates that they both play a very contested style. So I expect probably more stoppages for that reason, especially if it gets a bit slippery. They're very, very tough, both of them inside. You don't get away with a whole lot. So more stoppages would be great for Gorn. I think Well, he's my top pick again this week. Interesting what you mentioned about Danaher. Like very, very similar to Timmy English in that role he had last week. So I'd almost lean to Danaher. Well, McInerney does get a lot of ruck time. Almost leaning to Danaher over McInerney in terms of if you're going for a ticket, McInerney's the safer option, but Danaher's maybe got the higher ceiling at the same price. So if you're in a sort of win or go home contest, maybe you look at Danaher. Jackson does seem the worst of the four options, but like he does have that game in him, and considering how disappointing he was last week when there was a little bit of talk around you could play some Jackson, maybe he's one that you could identify at low ownership and hope for one of those big games. So I would go Gawn, McInerney, Danaher, Jackson, but I'd lean to Danaher if I'm playing a winner-take-all contest.
Ooh, okay. I'm a bit more safe as houses here, so I might just go Oscar McInerney for now. If I have some spare change, I might see if I can get to Danaher, but 10,230.
That's the point. There's not a whole lot of value, cheaper options on this slate, which does make it a bit harder to play Gawn. If there was a couple of obvious cheapies there, I'd be really happy locking in Gawn because, you've got to expect we're going to be getting around that 110 mark from Gawn. I think he's pretty safe there, but you've got to be able to afford him.
All right. Let's move on to the backline position. Now, I think we can look at Brisbane backs to this particular slate because the Demons have let a few get off the chain in the past 5 matches. Aaron Hall scored 143 a few rounds back. Bailey Dale and Hayden Crozier, they brought up tons last week as well. So, as I highlighted in the tools there, the D's is now starting to, the premium players are starting to get a good chunk of fantasy points. So this also brings Daniel Richard play at 13,970. He's taken all the kick-ins pretty much at this stage. Consistent scoring, good form, good average there. We talked about Christian Salem last week. We were pretty high on him last week. He did burnt us a bit. He's just a little bit cheaper there at 13,820. But unfortunately, this matchup is not as great as last week. So let's talk about the premium options first, particularly these two. Daniel Rich, 13.9. Christian Salem, 13.8.
Yeah, there's not much meat left on the bone there with Rich as he gets up towards that $14,000 mark. But I do agree with what you say. When we're talking premium midfielders, we obviously have the top 3 table there and the points against. And so we're looking at the top 3 defenders on each team. And, Melbourne are giving up a lot of points recently there. The Bulldogs went into huge chippy mode in the back half, which didn't do their chances of winning much good at all. I'm not so sure we'll see that sort of tactics from Brisbane. It's a tricky one. This position, Harms is a guy that you want to talk about because he is playing in the midfield. Sparrow coming in, offsets, Langdon going out. So you assume that the structure's still there for Harms to play a lot of midfield time. Obviously, they've talked about him doing roles. There's always the chance he's going to go to Lachie Neale with him coming back into the team. And we have seen Lachie Neale gettable by a tagger in the past sort of year or so. Not many teams have done it, but Harms is sort of that two-way tagging type that even if he does go to Neale, I don't think it's necessarily that bad for his own scoring. Look how consistent he is there at 12,000. I think there's still plenty of value to be had with Harms, maybe more so than Rich.
Let's move on to a bit down the page here. Grant Birchall at 10,880. Harris Andrews, the key defender, at 9.7. And then we start looking at the key defenders for Melbourne. Like talked up a lot, but Stephen May's fantasy production is not too great apart from that 80 last week. And then you've got here Jake Lever, also not too bad scoring, but I don't think their salaries are just a bit too high.
Yeah, they're well found, that's for sure. Birchall has come back a bit in price. We do remember a couple of weeks ago we were talking about him up at that sort of $12,000 mark. You see, he is capable of racking up the tons when the game is right. If Brisbane did end up taking the approach / being forced into the approach that the Bulldogs had last week, then potentially a Birchall-Rich combo would be quite reasonable. If you want to scroll down to something a bit cheaper, I've just got a little point I want to make. Brandon Starcevich is a guy who might be quite popular at that price. You see he's got 4 60s in a row with an 80 in there. So at that 7,800 salary, I assume he's probably going to be pretty popular, Starcevich. But they bring in Ryan Lester, who's, wow, in terms of a footy player, he's struggling to hit par. But he's going to be he's probably going to be much lower owned than Starcevich. If you look at those scores, he's obviously had some time on ground affected work there. But see the big 92 there earlier in the year. He did have a couple of games last year as well, a couple of ceiling games, which if we can find a guy who's going to hit the ceiling at low ownership, that is how you win contests in DFS. So Starcevich is probably going to be much higher owned. Where if you compare the two scores over the journey, I wouldn't think there's a whole lot between them. And I'd argue that Leicester's probably got a better ceiling. So I think this is such a tricky game fantasy-wise that you're going to have to go a little bit left field in a couple of spots. Like we do mention you need to do a lot of the time. Leicester's a guy who's on my radar for that sort of flyer position to just change you up a bit.
I do like it because also he just needs to score one more point in Starcevich and you've saved $200 to spend elsewhere. And that $200 could mean the difference between getting another guy who will score 10 more points than Starcevich and someone else. So I like your thinking, but
there is a chance he's going to go hopeless, of course. But
yes, of course.
Yeah, you do need to embrace the volatility a bit in these, especially if you're playing for a ticket. You need to come up with something that not many people have. And that's even when you look at a guy like Rivers, we talked about him last week, very, very flat scoring. So, yes, he's probably a safer option. Is he going to win you a contest? No. Someone like Leicester, if he does happen to pump out a 90, that's more likely to give you the big edge. But it's all about risk-reward building your lineups, isn't it, Smatho?
It is all about risk-reward. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to scroll back up and trust the data and click Daniel Rich. Because when you compare them to, if you do the all tag here and you compare the midfielders at higher price, we have doubts about Neil, obviously with the tag and coming back from the injury. Salem, yes, I can't see any of these guys apart from Harms scoring over 100. So that cheaper 13.9, I can get him in. I'm going to obviously punt other positions, but I think if I'm looking in a vacuum, if he's going to get 100, then I'm saving a couple of grand elsewhere. But I like the Leicester call. It might cost me a second entry into the ticket. So let's move on to the mids.
It might cost me more than that. It might cost me more dignity, actually. Going. But, that's the type of players I think we've got to find, and they are hard to come across.
Well, I'm looking forward to your lineup at the end of the show here. So let's look at them in the mids. Look, I mentioned earlier that the Demons are becoming a good team to target against premium opposition midfielders. All right. So in the past 3 games, the Demons have given Sam Walsh, Paul Seedsman, Keys, Bontempelli, McRae 115, 120 plus, quite easily. So this certainly brings in the likes of Jared Lyons and Hugh McCluggage in calculations, and then obviously the news today that Lachie Neale's back in. That also brings him back into calculations because obviously his ceiling is the best in the league. So, but McCluggage at 14,710 is probably the one that's going to be the most popular out of this one due to his contested possession accumulation. But I'm a bit iffy about Neale. So just reminding viewers what could happen in this for the Lions here against the D's. Yeah,
you might have got a bit jumbled there talking contesteds with McCluggage. I still sort of think he's more of your outsider. Jared Lyons is probably more of the inside. Obviously, we're getting Neale straight back in there. So it's a really tricky one with Neale. I don't think – I think there's a chance he could be a laid out, and that could cause carnage if you're playing a lot of lineups. Because I assume you're going to have a fair bit of exposure to Neale at that price. I think they won't risk him if he's not ready. But you do have the question mark on whether Harms goes to Neil. So if he does, it's not like though you're playing him at 16,000 and a tag, he gets an 80 and then you cactus. Like just that little bit lower price doesn't make it, if he does get tagged, maybe it's not the end of the world. So I think you've still got to have a fair bit of Neil in your lineups. If he gets to run free, then he's potentially breaking the slate there with 130 or something at 13,000. So he makes it a quite a little tricky decision there, Neil. I lean, if I had to choose Lions or McCluggage, I'd lean to Lions. One thing about Melbourne that we have mentioned on the show before is they do give up a lot of tackles for whatever reason. I think it's probably their contested style, but if you trust the data on that, I think Lions is an exceptional tackler. And yeah, look at those scores, just enormous. I do like coming into the premium players off a bit of a down week. It does seem to help with the motivation levels just a tad. So Lions is probably my favourite pick here of the Brisbane midfield. Looking at the midfield premium options for Melbourne, it's interesting to know where the ownership's going to go, because we almost consider Oliver and Petrarca in the same bracket all the time. This time you're getting Petrarca at a $1,300 discount. Oliver's scores there are just absolutely through the roof, and Petrarca's just come off the boil a little bit. But whether I almost lean to paying up for Oliver, because you know what you're getting, and he does have that massive ceiling. Petrarca maybe gets over-owned with the discount. If you do want to punt positions, like they're all great options. Like if you really want to pile into your midfield, I don't really have any knock on any of them for you.
No, but the problem is, Hef, we don't have much value to pile into them. So
no, you're going to need to punt. Well, you can't punt any lower than 9 in the ruck, so you're going to have to jump on my Ryan Lester wagon, Smatho, and really punt up forward, I think, as well.
Yeah, what I'm really doing is actually I'm going to punt here and get down to Tom Sparrow.
Tom Sparrow.
There is a 61 and a 59 there, which gives us 10x. I think if you can just ignore the average and the form there and just hopefully get into that, tackling of there's 6 tackles there, 4 tackles, 5 tackles, and if it's a little bit wet, hopefully you can get to 6 to 8 tackles. Then there's your 30 points in tackling alone. So he's going to slide in there for me since I have paid up in the backs. One guy's going to be really.
I noticed he was named on the wing there, Sparrow, but he has always been given some time in the centre bounces. So, like the way we're talking structures, if Langdon had all those midfield minutes, there should be opportunity for Sparrow. So I sort of like where you're going from there. If we're going to talk about Sparrow, we may as well talk about Devin Robertson as well, because he's had quite a bit of opportunity with Neil out of the team. Like we saw if you look at the centre bounce attendances, once Neil came out, obviously they replaced him with Matheson, but we also saw a spike for Devin Robertson, who's had somewhere between a third to a half of all the centre bounces in the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks that there's been no Neil there. Now, Neil coming back, even though Matheson goes out of the team, it probably affects Robertson. If you look there, he's probably going to be pretty popular with the consistency he's been able to hit 70. But I think it's probably a bit of a negative, even as much as like for like Neil and Matheson is. He takes up all those centre bounces, and Neil, he's 80 plus all the time, whereas Matheson was more 50, 60%. So where the drop-off comes, I think it comes from Robertson. So potentially a little bit of fool's gold. If you look at that 60, 70 averages numbers there against 8,000, he's going to be popular. If you're looking for a cheaper guy to be against, Robertson would sort of be a bit of a pick for me.
Yeah, I like that. I think he's a good candidate for the fade at higher ownership, because he's literally click him in the forward line. He's a midfielder in the forward line, 8K, sign me up. Yep. But if he loses that opportunity to get centre bounces and then finds himself out on a wing in wet conditions, he's not going to see much of it. So Yeah, this is a
And
fade.
he does have like a couple of 40s and a 30 in there, so yeah, it is possible to go against him if you're looking for an edge in that manner. Like we talk about looking at a guy like Leicester to differentiate your teams. Another way to differentiate is to play a pretty stock standard lineup, but by avoiding one of the more obvious plays. That is a way that you can sort of be a bit different to everyone.
I really like your Leicester play. I'm going to actually get him in now. Put him in there.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, geez.
Said no one ever.
All right, I'll leave that last midfield spot open because I want to talk about the forwards. This is a position that if you got the cash, I think you might be wasting it. Tom McDonald, 11,450. Look, he's a GPP player only. He could lead you to the promised land. Obviously, Zorko there is, a great option there to fill in one of your forward spots at 14,500. But I'll be scrolling down here and try and be saving much money as I can. Would you agree?
I think so. One thing we have mentioned about Harris Andrews, which sort of surprised me last year, Brennan Favola brought it up on Twitter. He gets a few goals kicked on him, Harris Andrews, for one of the premium defenders in the comp. So, yeah, if he does end up on McDonald, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. For some reason that these players are able to kick. They are able to score on Harris Andrews. It just seems counterintuitive to me, but it happens. I don't think there's any problem playing Zorko. They tend to lean on Zorko in these bigger games. He does. I think you find him up around the ball when times get tough. Zorko break glass in case of emergency, and he goes. And 14.5 is pretty good value for him. He's obviously in ripper form. Neil coming back potentially affects him a little bit, but he's very consistent, Zorko, and I think he does have a bit of a running tally going in his head. You will find if Zorko's down, he knows how to bump his score up. So I definitely don't mind putting Zorko in lineups. In terms of paying up for one of these key position players, it's hard, I think. A guy like Neil Bullen seems a really bad spot to be playing him at 10,000. He's got some really nice, consistent scores there, but I don't trust him yet, Neil Bullen. He just seems a bit of a downhill ski to me. Zach Bailey, we didn't talk about him in the midfield. He's another guy that's potentially a bit affected by Neil coming back. He's been around that sort of 30% mark for the centre bouncers. I think they'll probably still keep him around that 20 to 30%, but he does have. Well, he kicks a lot of goals for some average scores, Bailey. Like sometimes he'll bob up and kick 3, and you think, oh well, he should. If you scroll through there, kicks 4 goals, ends up with 72, a couple of goals, 70. He just doesn't seem to have the ceiling quite yet, Bailey, for me. But 70 is a pretty reasonable result at sub 10K. So he's in play, preferably as a forward rather than in your midfield. And then we go down, we see some pretty hard players to play, haven't we, Smatho?
I think I saw on AFL 360 about Daniel McStay. I think it was the coach. He was saying that he will have a role with someone. I think he might have a role.
Sort of a lever.
A lever, that's right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, one bloke to make mention of, you've scrolled down a little bit there, Keaton Coleman.
Keaton Coleman.
We'll call him Coleman. If you have a look there at his numbers, I think he's a bit hidden there because he's got those 2 sub games. Outside of that, he's quite consistent at 7,000. Quite lively, pretty cheap. Not the worst player in the world. Not the worst player in the world.
I was thinking earlier today at Charlie Cameron in these conditions at 7,860. Not sure the particular matchup that he'll get from the D's. Obviously, won't be Lever or won't be May.
No Neville Jetta either. I don't think he's in the team, is he? So he's always been a guy to be wary of, Jetta. I'm not necessarily sure they've got a matchup for him. I'm just looking through there. Hibbard, Salem, they don't strike as sharp guys to go with him. Rivers doesn't strike me quite like that either. So one thing about Charlie Cameron is when he's on, he does have a high ceiling, which you can't say for a lot of these guys down cheaper. So bit of the Ryan Lester. Hit the blue moon.
All right. I'm going to go on your Colburn call there at 7,000. That leaves me 12.2. I've already got Harms in at 12.9. So that leaves Mitch Robertson and James Jordan there. I don't mind that. Maybe I can shuffle around Harms and get another 12K mid, Stephen May. No, I'm quite happy with that one. Also, there's a couple of out there calls. Obviously, Clayton Oliver and Rich and Zorko are my selling blokes. But, yeah, this is a tough one. As you said pre-show, this is the lack of value on this particular slate means that you have to make the big calls. And if you make the big calls, your slides, it's going to look garbage on first impression. But if you want to be unique, if you want to take down these tickets, you want to take down these GPPs, make some calls. And obviously this show we've made some bizarre calls tonight, but they might, as I said, we might look stupid this particular round.
We'll always look stupid.
Look as when it's no, your teeth are great, mate. Your absolute teeth are great. Just quickly, do you want to? Have you got a side for us?
No, I definitely don't have a team. It feels like a night where you're going to be pretty obvious and then randomise a couple of spots and hope you land on, as I call it, hope you land on a Mark Bagley. That's one of my favourite memories of winning a contest because I landed on Mark Bagley because he fit and no one had him and he kicked about 5 and would never have picked him in a million years. But, yeah, you're going to need something. So you got to give yourself a chance. That's what I'm saying, Smatho.
Got to have a chance. All right.
Especially if you're playing for that ticket. You don't get paid for coming a good 200th out of 3,000. You only get paid for being number one. And if you have to look silly to do so, give yourself a chance.
Excellent. We're under 100 tickets, by the way, so we're nearly at the halfway mark. But, make sure you get the draftstars.com.au to into the variety of contests. A bit of a scheduling note. We are back on Wednesday, June 9. We're going to be breaking down both Port Adelaide and the Cats and also the Swans and the Hawks. So we're back to the 2 games here, Hef. So
thank Christ we get the Hawks. We've been dealing with some real stingy performers, haven't we?
Yes. So
I'm looking forward to previewing the Swans against the Hawks.
So two games we'll be breaking down next week. So make sure you get to at Rankings DFS, which is our Twitter handle for Daily Fantasy Rankings, and also at Draftstars for all your competition for Daily Fantasy. Tristan, thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you for all the viewers for the show. Looking forward to catching up on the next edition of DFS Down Under the show. Looking forward to seeing everyone on the leaderboards, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks, Hef.
Thank you. Best of luck to everyone. See you next week, Smatho.
See you then. Cheers.